Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining me today for episode 727 of People Behind the Science. Today, I am excited to be re-sharing our interview with our guest, Dr. Erin Hodgson, originally released on February 22nd of 2016. Listeners, if you haven't had a chance to meet Erin yet, she is an extension entomologist who studies insects in agriculture, particularly when it comes to corn and soybean crops. As part of her extension work, she translates important science to help people like farmers, crop consultants, industry professionals, regulators, and people working in the pest management industry to best deal with agricultural pests. And in our interview, Erin shares some great stories from her life and research. So I hope you are ready to enjoy this episode of People Behind the Science.
Every day, discoveries are made that will change our understanding of the world around us. Dr. Marie McNeely is here to bring you the brilliant minds who are making these discoveries so they can share their incredible stories and take you on an amazing journey. Welcome to People Behind the Science.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of People Behind the Science. Listeners, today I am thrilled to introduce you all to Dr. Erin Hodgson. So, Erin, thank you so much for joining us today on the show. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me today.
Well, thank you for joining us. I'm excited to share your experiences with our listeners. But before we dive into our official interview questions, I want to give them some background information about you. So listeners, Erin is an associate professor and extension entomologist at Iowa State University. She received her undergraduate training in biology and botany and her master's degree in entomology from North Dakota State University. Erin was awarded her Ph.D. in entomology from the University of Minnesota, followed by a postdoctoral research position also at the University of Minnesota. She then served on the faculty at Utah State University before she joined the faculty at Iowa State, where she is today. And now Erin has received many awards and honors in her career, including the Editor's Choice Award from the Journal of Soil and Water Conservation, the Iowa State University Outreach and Extension New Professor Award, as well as multiple awards from the Entomological Society of America for her educational and outreach efforts. And in addition, Erin is the co-host of the Soybean Pest Podcast with her colleague, Matt O'Neill. And she is here with us today to talk about her experiences in life and science. So Erin, we are looking forward to getting to know you, both as a scientist, but also as a person. So can you start off this interview by telling us what you like to do with your time when you're not busy doing science?
When I'm not busy doing science? Well, I'm married and I have 2 dogs, one of which is a puppy. And so we're spending a lot of time outside and with some obedience type things. Also, I decided this semester to help as an assistant coach for the women's rugby club here at Iowa State University. So I'm just helping with practices, games, all that kind of stuff. And so keeping busy in the evenings as well.
Fantastic. Now, are you a former rugby player yourself, or do you play now?
Yeah, I used to play and help start the team when I was at North Dakota State. And so it has been quite a while since I've had my coaching hat on. But the girls are just excited to have someone help because it's a very large team. So when you have 30 or so girls running around, you kind of need more than 1 or 2 people with the coaching.
Absolutely. Well, it sounds like you are keeping quite busy with your family, your dogs, and the rugby. I want to talk next, though, about your science. So can you tell us how you describe what you do to someone who might not be very familiar with your field?
Actually, the biggest part of my job in my employment right now is extension. And for those people that, even if they are in science, they may not be familiar with the concept of extension. And so just a little bit of background, the Morrill Acts of 1862 and 1890 help fund land-grant universities like Iowa State University and give them a chance to, or the opportunity to translate practical science. And that was called extension. And so 70% of my job is extension. And so I help educate people that need help in entomology or the science of insects. And for me, my particular expertise is insects that are in agriculture. In Iowa, that's corn and soybean. And so I help people like farmers, crop consultants, people that work in ag industry, people that just work in extension that need some help, and also regulatory folks. So I help educate them on aspects of pest management. I provide continuing education to those people and help them kind of manage pests in the agriculture landscape.
Well, very interesting to hear more about your work. And I think this communication and education of different people about your field is really important. So is this part of the job that you enjoy?
Absolutely. When I first was thinking about grad school, I thought I wanted to teach, and therefore getting a Ph.D. would help me reach that goal. But sometimes when I was doing some of the TAs and the labs, I thought students were kind of scary, to be honest, just because they're so smart. They're so curious. They ask a lot of questions. And
looking at that room of judging faces as you're
yes, it's intimidating. But when I got a few opportunities during my PhD to go to field days, get to meet farmers and more kind of one-on-one interactions, and those people that really, they couldn't get enough. And so they just tell me what I need to do to be successful as far as pest management. And so my inclination was to go more that way instead of inside the classroom. So as I was nearing graduation, I was specifically looking for those types of jobs that had an extension appointment that I could help translate something that seemed very complicated and tell them in a way that was more plain language, how to manage their farm and be successful.
Very, very cool. And now we've talked a little bit about your position and some of the things that you like to do outside of your scientific life. And I think it's a lot to balance sometimes. So I myself am one of these people who's motivated by quotes. So Erin, I want you to share with us today one of your own favorite quotes.
I don't actually have a very good memory, so I'm not a person that just brings out a quote. I do enjoy quotes, but I don't remember them. But one that maybe does stick in my mind and is short, so it kind of falls within my memory span, is it's called Happiness is a Choice. And I don't know who originally said it, and I tried to dig back. But through my personal life and work life, there's a lot of roadblocks in the way, and like a grant doesn't get funded, or you don't get the lab space or the equipment that you want or whatever it is. There's so many things that are out of our control, but I try to make the best out of that and feel like not turning everything into lemonade that way, but happiness is a choice. And although what might appear initially as a setback, maybe turning that around or building that into a positive whenever it comes to like a research or student or anything that happens in work or personal life, just trying to make the best out of whatever happens.
I like it, Erin. I know myself, I am a perpetual optimist, so I'm always trying to find the bright side as well.
I really am, yeah.
Well, wonderful to hear about what inspires you and keeps you going, but I want to know next about who has inspired you. So can you tell us about some of these role models who you've had throughout your career?
I've been fortunate enough to have some really strong mentors and advisors for my master's and PhD. And so when I think about the people that really influenced me as far as conducting science, talking about science, especially to a non-scientific audience, it has been my advisors, and particularly my PhD advisor, Dr. David Ragsdale. This was when I was at the University of Minnesota. Now he is a chair at Texas A&M, but he had a special gift for translating knowledge to a non-scientific audience, in which I try and draw from that still today, and how to make it relevant, how to make it so I can answer those so what or now what type of questions that farmers often have. Of course, he was very gifted in research as well, so I try to take some of his examples and apply them to when I have graduate students of my own, try to get them to be more of a well-rounded type project by the end so they can do whatever they want after they graduate. And it's not so locked in to a specific insect or specific research question that they can't translate it to anything else.
Certainly. And I really like how you brought up this importance of the so what questions, because those are the ones that everyone asks. The big, what do you do question.
Yeah.
Everyone wants to know, okay, so you tell them this whole complicated description and they're like, and then?
Yeah. Why would anyone else care about this? That's what I hope I can get across to some of my students.
Absolutely. Well, definitely great to hear about one of your mentors, one of these people who've had a big impact on your career. But I want to go all the way back to the beginning, Erin. Can you tell us what started this interest in science for you? Where was that spark?
That's also interesting. I don't have like a family background that had a strong history of going to college before me. I just was always interested in science class. And so like junior high, high school, just took all the science that I could and thinking, I just want to go to college and learn more about science. And so I don't exactly know why. It just seemed more interesting to me than like the history part of classes, or even just like the math. I mean, math was okay to me. It didn't exactly light a fire under me, but it seemed like science, like just basic biology questions, biology observations, always maybe were a little bit more interesting and sparked curiosity in me than maybe some of the other topics did.
Gotcha. So did you have an inherent love of insects growing up, or was this something that developed later?
There's basically two kinds of entomologists in my world. There are the people that have loved insects from birth.
The bug collections, right?
Yeah, they've got a sweet collection, since they started when they were 4 years old. And then there was other people like me who maybe didn't realize that they loved insects until they took a class in college. And so that's basically as a biology major, you kind of take one of everything. I mean, it was like a micro class. I took an algae class. I took an entomology class and so on. And I did like it very much. But at that time, I wasn't thinking about grad school. I wanted to get a degree, get a job. But then with a biology degree, it wasn't clear to me that you're probably not qualified to do much. Many people get a biology degree because they're pre-med or pre-vet. And so I had a hard time even being able to be qualified for anything. And so I saw this advertisement that said, hey, get a master's degree. We'll give you a stipend. We'll pay your tuition. You can get experience so that you can get a job. And that was really the hook for me. It was like, oh, entomologists get jobs. And so that's basically the route I took. Was I just want to get a little bit more experience. I really liked entomology, and I went to grad school from there.
Well, I'm glad you brought up this point. I think a lot of students don't realize that when they go on for these higher degrees, whether it's a master's degree, a Ph.D., you get paid a stipend. You get paid to go to school, right? This is fantastic.
It's not always the case, but in entomology in particular, it really is kind of the standard. Like at least part of your tuition or part of a stipend, it's not like you're getting rich, but it is pretty much a standard in entomology that you will have your graduate school at least partially paid for. I'm not sure if that's true for all the sciences, but it is encouraging to know that a lot of our graduate school is funded by research. And so that part drives, I think, some of the people to entomology is that you have some of your graduate school paid for.
Certainly. I know I did a Ph.D. program in neuroscience, and going into the process as an undergraduate, I had no idea. It was sort of like a happy bonus at the end. Like, yes. Wait, I don't have to pay for school? That's great.
And most people, they're done with student loans. They want to break from taking out all that money. And so it is a way to kind of help lessen the burden maybe of school loans if you go to graduate school.
Absolutely. So then tell us a little bit more. We touched on kind of what attracted you to the extension aspect of your job. Can you tell us what are some of these key moments that really took you to where you are today now at Iowa State?
Well, I am interested in agriculture, although I didn't come from a farm. That is sort of the automatic that people think because agriculture is so important to me. I must have grown up on a farm, but I really didn't. I have people that farm in my family, but I didn't grow up on the farm. But you can see the value of things like pest management when it comes to farming, just the devastating losses that can happen if the pest management is not something on the forefront on the farm. And so to develop research objectives or strategies to help suppress pests, to keep farms more sustainable, I guess that part was attractive to me. It's an immediate impact that you can have on farmers. Some of the research that's out there is awesome. It's wonderful, but you're thinking like 10 or 20 years in the future of application. And I'm doing something that the things I'm doing right now, I can recommend right now to farmers, and it makes an immediate impact.
And I think that immediate gratification is rare in science. I think this is something where, like I said, I work in neuroscience. You are waiting, like you said, 10, 20 years for any of this to make it to the clinic. So.
And some of ours is very quick turnaround. You can be working for a month or so, see results from research that you're doing either in a greenhouse or growth chamber, put it out in the field that next summer, and you can have farmers come for field days or plot tours, and they see immediately what you're doing. And sometimes the visual treated versus untreated is so drastic that they're like, yes, I want to do this on my farm. I can see it's making a financial impact on some of the treatments that you're including or not including.
That is so cool. So Erin, give us a little bit more detail now on one of these projects you have going on right now that you are so excited about.
The main focus of my research, which is about 30% of my job, is surrounding aphids. I think there's 4,000 or 5,000 different species, but the aphids that I'm particularly interested in is an aphid that feeds on soybean called soybean aphid. Interesting how entomologists create these common names, but then there's also some aphids that feed in corn. And most of the research that I have funded right now is for soybean aphid, which is a primary soybean pest in the north central region. It's an invasive pest, and it's been in North America for about 15 years. And since then, there have been some fantastic breeding efforts looking at naturally occurring germplasm called host plant resistance. So soybean aphids that feed on host plant resistant soybean don't do as well. They don't live as long or produce as many offspring. And that's just really fantastic because naturally occurring germplasm, you don't have any of the regulatory restrictions that come with transgenic crops like you have for some other pests. And then also it reduces pesticide use. So if you have host plant resistance, you can expect to limit the amount of pesticides that you have to apply to protect the crop. So I'm very interested in host plant resistance when it comes to soybean aphid. And I recently got a grant by the North Central Region SARE, which is Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education. They're funding a project right now that will support a student. Actually, the grant just became live yesterday to look at some of those applications on farms. And so we want farmers to see firsthand how effective host plant resistance can be, especially when it comes to reducing pesticide use. And that just reduces their input costs as well. So they're just making more money by using some of this technology. So very excited, because that's really what I want to do is show farmers firsthand on their farm. This is the tool that you can use and be very successful.
Well, this is phenomenal work, Erin. I'm curious. Now, the work that you're doing in Iowa, are the applications generalizable? Are you able to apply these findings everywhere in the world? Or are they pretty specific to the climate, the environment you're working with here?
Host plant resistance isn't something that's new because of soybean aphid. Host plant resistance has been around basically as long as crops have been in cultivation. So there's just naturally occurring variation, which some insects don't like as well. So, of course, those are the plants that people are going to prefer to use, because you don't want something that's super attractive to insects. And so it's not a novel concept for soybean aphid, but the way that we're using it on such a broad level, on a landscape level, could have an impact for soybean aphid. And basically, it's a pest in the Midwest or the North Central region. So we're hoping that some of our research efforts will spill over beyond Iowa to all the surrounding states that have problems with soybean aphid. So in the end, it could be millions of acres that are impacted because of the adoption of host plant resistance. That would be my ultimate goal.
Very, very interesting. And now, are these aphids a problem in other countries as well, or is it primarily the Midwest of the United States that are struggling with them?
Well, it's native to areas in Asia like China, but it's been a long-standing pest association with soybean in China. Soybean aphid isn't considered a primary pest. It's controlled by natural enemies and other things. So it really isn't something that's on their top 10 list. Same with some of the surrounding countries around China. It's not considered a primary pest. And so in the world, I should say, soybean aphid is primarily an issue in North America and a little bit in Canada. But it doesn't mean that it couldn't be moving to other soybean production regions in the world. It's just so far, the last 10 or so years, it's been mostly United States and Canada.
Very interesting. Well, Erin, it's been great to hear about what you're working on in the lab, and exciting to hear about your path to where you are today as a scientist. But I think we've hit a lot of the high points, and we haven't yet talked about all the low points. So yeah. I am going to make you talk about those next. I think every scientist has these points, these challenges, these struggles, these failures. And I think it's really important to talk about them so people get a realistic view of the life of a scientist and understand some of the challenges that scientists face. So can you take us back to a low point in your life, in your career, and tell us how you worked through that tough time?
When I talk about soybean aphid and host plant resistance, it's kind of like all good. There haven't been a lot of negative feedback from that type of research because it's just so fantastic. You know, people are really interested in giving it a try. But as I said, a lot of my job is extension. And in Iowa, our major crop here is corn. We have about 20 million acres of corn, and we have a lot of pests that are associated with that. Probably the biggest pest that we're facing right now is called corn rootworm, and it's sometimes nicknamed the billion-dollar beast or the billion-dollar pest because of the economic potential it has to take away yields and really hurt market values. And to counteract that billion-dollar beast, we have a transgenic that we use in corn that is very specific to corn rootworm. And when it first came out in 2006, it was highly effective. It was kind of seen as a silver bullet in which we could reduce a lot of pesticides. Shortly after it was released for farmers to use, the product started to break down. And that research was done by a colleague here, Erin Hodgson, at Iowa State University. And so I started talking about it, letting farmers know that this is not something you could just plant and walk away. And initially, when I started talking about it, you can imagine industry not so excited to hear about that.
Right. Bad news.
The product that they spent a lot of time and a lot of money getting approved and getting out there, and the market share is starting to break down. And so I had a lot of pushback from industry basically saying, you can't say that. We don't want you to say that. Just a lot of anonymous feedback, I should say, that said, we don't think what you're saying is correct or accurate. And so it was really hard because I've never really had pushback, because basically when extension, I talk about research. I say, these are not just my thoughts. I'm talking about translating research. So I'm telling you the best of my knowledge, what I know. So there's just a lot of harsh feedback, harsh questions. Are you really saying what you're saying, or is it accurate? And so it took about 3 years before industry was more readily willing to hear my research updates. And now it's not quite as tense, It's not quite as hard to listen to. It's more easy to have a back and forth conversation. But actually, it's still hard to hear because they don't necessarily like to hear those kinds of updates.
Certainly. So I'm curious to hear about your experiences in your training and some of the things that may or may not have prepared you for these types of interactions. I think moving into an industry position or in a position like yours where you're interfacing with people in industry is sometimes a challenge for scientists because they don't feel prepared for it.
I could say that I wasn't really trained for something like that because my intuition says if you're not necessarily like you're telling the truth, but you're telling the story the best that you know, that's where the conversation starts from there. But there really was just so much pushback about what is true, what is a science type question that I really didn't have a good mechanism to respond to that. And so I just had some hard times out there in the public trying to back up research, back up some of these questions that people were asking. So I would say I wasn't prepared.
Gotcha. So what was your strategy then to get through it? Or what are some of these things that you learned along the way that helped you make it through?
Basically, how I've handled it so far, and I think when this situation happens again, it's likely to happen many times in my career, is just to rely on the science. Say, this is what we know. This is to the best of our ability. How I can make these recommendations that I'm making is because of the science that's been conducted. And it's easy to kind of go with the scare tactics or anecdotal evidence, but I've just tried to rely on science. Basically, this is what we know today. This is why I'm saying what I'm saying, kind of thing.
Certainly. I think trying to take the charge out of it, trying to sort of be this observer of what's going on rather than someone who's invested with biases one way or another. I think that is important.
That's a good point.
So great strategy, Erin, to make it through these tough times. And I'm really glad you brought up these interactions that you've been having as an extension specialist, because that's something people may want to think about, whether this career is for them or not. Or are they willing and able to do that?
I should say that it's not just industry. Sometimes you're having these conversations with regulatory people like through the EPA or the Department of Agriculture in different states. They have a different stand. They have a different reason for what they're saying too. So it's just kind of a lot of different audiences, and trying to understand kind of where they're coming from also helps.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing this experience with us today. We've made it through the hard part of the interview. Now we get to talk about successes and tell fun stories. So Erin, I want you to think back on your career and share with us one of these happy moments of success in science. And it can be a big victory or even just a small win that was really meaningful for you.
When I think about sort of the projects I developed as a Ph.D. student, I was one of the first people in North America to work on soybean aphid. And then I'm thinking about basically the last 10 years since I've graduated. One of the highlights that I'm probably most proud of is a sampling plan that I developed for soybean aphid, because in some situations when they get out of control and conditions are favorable, they can build up to thousands per plant. It's a very unpleasant situation to be in when you're walking through a soybean field and you have thousands of aphids on plants.
Oh my gosh.
Up to your armpits. It's a sticky situation. So I didn't want farmers to have to kind of do that in order to make a treatment decision. So I developed a sampling plan that tells them very quickly whether they should make a treatment or not. So they're not spending a lot of time walking through fields. And I named this sampling plan Speed Scouting for Soybean Aphid. This was while I was at Minnesota. It's something that people are still using today throughout the North Central region. And it really is kind of geared towards farmers or crop consultants, people that they don't necessarily care about the biology of soybean aphid or the reproduction rate or some of the questions that I'm interested in. They're just simply saying, do I need to do something to protect this crop right now? Yes or no? And so it's something that's really applied. It's something that's continued on. I created that plan, I think it was in 2004. So it's been about 10 years, and it's not for everybody, but for those people that like it, they really, really like it. So I'm probably most proud of developing that sampling plan.
Well, congratulations on this success. And I love the name. So can you give us a little bit of insight here? When you say speed sampling, how fast are we talking for a farmer to assess their field?
Well, speed scouting is not necessarily that like you're running through fields. It's a binomial sequential sampling plan. So is a plant infested or not? So yes or no. And you just go through this little matrix that I developed. And so hopefully within 15 minutes, you'd be able to make a treatment decision, as opposed to most kind of standard scouting protocols where you're spending probably 30, 40 minutes or an hour going through a field before you can say, yeah, I think I've got a problem here. So with this matrix, it just kind of tells you yes or no. And so you don't have to do any math. It just kind of follows this little scouting sheet that I created. maybe it's a little bit misleading. You're not like sprinting through the field.
That sounds fun though.
You still have to count units and you still have to like look at plans.
Gotcha. It sounds like you provide a great framework though, a nice decision tree for people to quickly go through and make their assessment.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations on that success, Erin. I think that is phenomenal that you're able then to create this tool that one, people are using immediately and a lot of people are beginning to adopt, it sounds like.
It's certainly popular in certain areas where they have persistent soybean aphids. So if they have it most years, they're more likely to use the tool than if they only have it every 2, 3, 4 years.
Certainly. Well, it's been great to hear more about some of the projects you've been working on over the years, as well as the stuff going on right now in the laboratory. And I know scientists keep quite busy with their research, with their work, trying to keep up with the literature. But I love to talk to scientists as well when they get to escape the literature. What do they prefer to read? So I want you to give us a book recommendation, something that you've really enjoyed reading that you think myself and our listeners should pick up.
Well, if it's a book for fun, a book that I would recommend to people is something that was based on The Princess Bride. And it's a movie that many people have seen. And so it's a grandpa telling this story to his grandson while he was sick. And it's actually based on the Morgenstern classic Tale of True Love and High Adventure by William Goldman. That's a book I would recommend. It's called The Princess Bride, and it's based on William Goldman's novel, the same name. It's just really fun because if you like The Princess Bride, you have the giant, you have the witches and everything, and the true love story. It's just a really fun read. It was actually my first attempt at trying an ebook, like a Kindle book. Mm-hmm. It was just really fun. Fighting, fencing, torture, death, pirates, giants. It has it all. So I would recommend it for fun.
I like it. So do you usually find yourself drawn to these maybe more whimsical, fiction-y type books?
Yeah, I definitely enjoy those books. Like my mom, we read a lot of murder mystery, and especially kind of like the English Hercule Poirot, Agatha Christie type things. I like to dig into maybe the older murder mysteries. I kind of like a lot of everything, but the whimsy is always appreciated, I think, just for a total break from my everyday reading.
Absolutely. I know I myself have been kind of drawn back to the classics. I've been reading a lot of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle lately, a lot of great things there, Sherlock Holmes. So.
Yes, very fun.
Well, thank you for sharing a book recommendation with us today. We'll be sure to add The Princess Bride to our list on our website for our listeners. And now we've talked a little bit about your experiences as a scientist. And I think one of the big parts of the career is travel. You get to travel quite a bit for conferences, meetings, to work with collaborators. So Erin, I want you to think now about all the places that science has taken you. And can you tell us what your favorite travel experience was, where you were, and why it was so memorable?
This is interesting. I really haven't traveled very much for like vacations and stuff, but I have had the opportunity to travel quite a bit within the United States for entomology meetings, conferences, workshops. And so I've enjoyed many of those places, and I wouldn't be able to see them without the help of entomology. But probably my favorite trip was actually this year when I got a chance to be a co-instructor for a tropical agriculture class here at Iowa State. They get to go to Costa Rica over spring break. So this is really one of my first chances to see agriculture outside of the United States, and it was fantastic. We got to see small-scale farming, people that are working on a sustainable level, so it's parents and their family and grandparents working on just a couple of acres at forest assistance farming, and pineapple, banana. We saw all these different kinds of crops like coffee, and a lot of ornamentals that we actually see in greenhouses here are started down in Costa Rica. And I just thought, of course, Costa Rica is a beautiful place and lots of fantastic things to see, food to eat. But just the level of farming and the high intensity that they're having for some of the farms, it was a cool place to visit, and I can't wait to go back. I hope I get a chance to go back to Costa Rica. Very
cool to hear about your experiences in Costa Rica. So were you able to actually get on some of the farms there and walk around and explore them?
Yes, and that's part of the experience. Is we took people movers through pineapple. We walked through banana plantations. We saw people harvesting, we saw people planting, and some of the things like the banana, that was very large scale, run by Dole. It's a huge corporation. But then we saw the farmer who is supporting basically 12 people on a couple acres. And so we saw people intercropping and just other techniques that I had never seen before. So we saw kind of large scale to small scale, but it was really the small scale that was most impressive to me.
That's awesome. So did you get to sample any of the food grown on the farm then?
Yes, we did. The coffee plantation that we visited, we got to see how people taste and rate coffee, and they're taking something like 300 cups of coffee that they're tasting and assessing every day. So we've got to taste some coffee and also harvesting pineapple right off the plant and seeing how they assess whether it's ready or not. And we got so much pineapple, I think everyone was like, I can't handle any more. Right. And I don't want to have any more pineapple unless it's in Costa Rica because it's so good compared to by the time it comes up to us. in the supermarkets, it's just not the same. I think pineapple now is one of those where it's like, well, I've had the best in the
You're disappointed now with your selection. Yeah. So how do they harvest pineapple? I mean, this is sort of a shrubby low plant with the, like, how does it work?
And it's kind of a dangerous plant. I mean, the leaves themselves are very spiny.
Okay.
And so it's people that are doing the harvesting, and it's kind of like a assembly line where they're in the rows. They have these very sharp knives that are cutting off pineapples, and they're kind of passing them along until it gets to a truck that keeps all the pineapples. And so it was hand harvested. And because of how sharp the leaves are, they were in flannel up to their neck, and they had headgear, they had thick gloves on, and it was nearly 100 degrees, and they were working by hand. And I can't imagine how hot it would have been inside the rows, inside those trenches that they have to build.
Oh my goodness. I was hoping there was some sort of sweet machine that could do it, because they are a bit treacherous.
No. And same thing with banana. They were doing it by hand, and that's an even more tedious process because of the pest pressure. They have to do these little bags around the bananas as they're developing, and it's a constant care. I can't believe how cheap bananas are. I think they should be like 10 times more expensive for the amount of effort it takes to harvest a bunch of bananas. It's mind-boggling how much attention they get.
Well, listeners, we are going to have to think about this and appreciate it more next time we eat a banana. So, Erin, thank you so much for sharing your experiences on this trip. It sounds like a phenomenal opportunity to get out and see how other people are living, how other people are farming in another country. So now tell us a little bit about some of the people you've worked with. I know as a scientist, you get to work with phenomenal people. You get a lot of fun, quirky, brilliant people together, and crazy things happen, right? So there's a lot of fun traditions. I've talked to scientists that have developed in laboratories over the years, or just some fun memories that you share together. So can you tell us one of these stories that really highlights the human side of science from your memories?
You had mentioned a podcast that I do at Iowa State University and co-host Matt O'Neill. We have a lot of overlapping projects as far as research. He doesn't have an extension appointment, but he might as well because he enjoys the extension aspect very much. And of course, that podcast is just one example. But we share resources, we share space, and so we just work together very nicely on a lot of different things. And as a result of that, we share students, we share vehicles, we just share a lot of stuff. And so because of all the overlapping projects we have probably 6 or 7 grad students, maybe a couple postdocs, and we hire this huge crew of undergrads. And it's work that is highly repetitious. It's very hard and strenuous work in the summer.
You're really selling it here.
Yeah, I know. Usually no one ever comes back, but we hire about 15 or 20 undergrads in the summer to work full time for us. And so one tradition that we've had is to have kind of an end of the summer, thanks for sticking it out, because it is pretty brutal work. And so we have a barbecue, and then we just have like long games. So we play volleyball, softball, bocce ball. We just kind of have an afternoon where we just appreciate them because of the hard work. A lot of people don't make it, and they don't make it till August because they find they'd rather just work in a coffee shop or whatever.
Right, somewhere with air conditioning. And
Yes, air conditioning. And so we just throw this end of the year thank you, and it really has become a tradition since I started in 2009 where we just say thanks and we appreciate it. We hope they learn how to conduct science, how to set up an experiment, how to collect data. And a lot of them are not going to be in entomology, but a lot of them will be in some sort of science, either for their major, maybe even a graduate program. We hope they learned a little bit about how to do that and how to ask research questions. And then we just say thanks. Thanks for coming, and hope you enjoyed the summer in a lot of different ways.
Well, this sounds like an excellent tradition to express gratitude for all those hardworking students.
It's a fun tradition.
Well, I'm curious, Erin, you mentioned lawn games. Do you have a particular favorite lawn game of choice?
Well, there is a game that has many different names. Sometimes it's called beanbag. But in Iowa, because it's Iowa, we call it cornhole. Basically, you throw these bags, those little bean bags filled with corn kernels, into a board that has a hole. It's just a fun game. I mean, you don't have to have really any expertise or any skill or anything like that, actually. So we often find ourselves playing cornhole on the weekends and that kind of thing.
Well, we call it cornhole here in St. Louis as well. So.
Oh, you do? So it's not a totally foreign concept. Okay, good.
I am terrible at it, but yes, I am familiar.
Okay, good.
Well, fantastic to hear about this tradition you have. And I love hearing the different ways that labs are able to get together and celebrate. And this sounds like a great celebration of making it through the difficult summer work.
Yeah, we even made them T-shirts this year. I made a T-shirt and gave everybody a shirt because I was just, thanks for sticking it out. They're good sports because some of it is just the most brutal, physical. There's dirt, mud, there's mosquitoes, there's everything. So we just say, thank you, thank you, thank you. Please consider coming back.
Here's your T-shirt. Yes.
Yeah.
I like it. Well, Erin, like I said, great to hear about this tradition. And now I think we've talked about a lot of the different aspects of your career. We've talked about some of the projects you've been able to work on. And I'm curious about the unanswered questions that remain in your mind. So Erin, if we gave you everything today, if things like funding and staff and technology and feasibility, all these major barriers in science were no longer a problem, I want you to dream big with us today and tell us what is the question or what are the questions that you would love to see answered.
Almost everything that I do has an applied nature. I want the research that I am conducting or my students are conducting to be able to have a direct application to agriculture. And I mentioned before about the work I'm doing with host plant resistance for soybean aphid. What I didn't mention is that it's somewhat complicated, as you would expect, because within a few short years, genetic biotypes have developed for soybean aphid where they're able to overcome host plant resistance. And breeders have developed 4 or 5 different kinds of host plant resistant genes, but we also have at least 4 biotypes that can overcome certain genes. And like I said, it becomes a tangled web very quickly. And so because I like to think about managing soybean aphid on the landscape level, I would like to better understand how biotypes and the distribution of biotypes and then the different kinds of host plant resistant genes are all interacting with each other so that we could maybe deploy a system for kind of a landscape level suppression of soybean aphid so that we don't have to think about soybean aphid anymore because it's bred into the plants. We can reduce pesticide usage, which is great for non-targets, for pollinators, for humans and other animals that get exposed to pesticides, and ultimately save farmers money as well. So that would be another benefit. But actually to look at soybean aphid on a landscape level is something it'd be really hard for me to do right now with what I have. But if I had unlimited resources, I would be able to think like really big picture, like North Central region.
So Erin, I have a tough question for you to follow up with that.
Yeah.
If soybean aphids were taken care of, say you found the ultimate solution, you were able to address them, what would you want to work on next?
There are so many pests to choose from. So that's, I don't want to say the nice thing, but when it comes to pests on crops, when you have something solved or kind of under control, a new invasive will always come in. And so soybean aphid is just the last example of an invasive, but there are several that are on the horizon. One example would be brown marmorated stink bug. And we have other types of caterpillars that are becoming potential pests and invasive into North America. So I think once you figure out the model for soybean aphid, and I think we'll be able to figure out how to best manage this pest so the farmers don't have to think about it too much. But there's always going to be the latest and greatest invasive or the development of resistance to any of those technologies. So I would be interested in learning more about invasive species and how to manage those, not just soybean, but all agriculture. We're having a lot of specialty crops in Iowa, and specialty crops have their own special pests. Hops is one example. We're kind of having a booming hops industry in Iowa right now, and no one really knows what is the pest complex, what is the potential for injury. And so soybean aphid is just one example, but we just have a lot of different things kind of on the back burner that could be flaring up at any moment.
I like it. Well, Erin, thank you for thinking big with us today. And I think you're absolutely right. There's always going to be the next big thing. You know, once you solve a problem in science, you're never done. Your work is never done.
No, that's absolutely true.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, like I said, for thinking big with us and talking about some of these big questions in your field. And next, I'd like to talk about some of the advice you received over the course of your career. We always like to give our listeners a little piece of advice that they can take forward to help them along their journey. So can you share maybe one of the best pieces you think you've ever received?
I think probably a couple of things come to mind. One is to just always be curious. What if? What now? What next? Just asking those questions. Like you said, if you get something kind of under control, now what? And kind of just thinking of what are the possibilities of research questions. If we had unlimited funds, what would we do? We've asked that question in our lab before. And okay, we can't do that, but can we take a slice off of that and work on that question? So always be curious, ask a lot of questions, and just listen as well. I find a lot of times when I go to conferences, I always hear things that I can apply in my own lab or to my extension program. And so I just actually do a lot of listening. So be curious, ask questions, and listen is maybe the best advice I could give to like a graduate student or someone who's doing a postdoc and thinking about a career in science.
Well, it sounds like you've got the 3-step program for success there, Erin.
I didn't mean it that way, but that's how it came out, I guess.
Well, that is fantastic. Erin, thank you for sharing that advice with us today. Is there any other last piece of advice or a last note of inspiration that you would like to end our conversation on today?
Yeah, I would say just be open to opportunities, especially collaboration, and particularly in science right now, it seems that's how we get successfully granted, is when you have a multi-PI, whether it's multi-university, multi-state. It seems like the projects that I've been on lately, it's not just me. It's a group of people that are interested in a common question or a set of questions. And so be open to the opportunities that may not seem immediately of your primary interest, but because of your expertise or whatever they've asked you to join this group, I've had some success that way with getting additional students or getting some leverage funding is because I'm on these collaborative efforts. I'm not sure if that's the way it is for a lot of aspects in science or disciplines in science, but in entomology, it seems if you can work with a plant pathologist or you can work with an agronomist, that really can open the door for research and extension opportunities that maybe you wouldn't have if you were just trying to do it all on your own. So I would maybe just say work with others as much as possible if it fits into some of your career goals.
Certainly. And I think you can start to answer some of these bigger questions when you are bringing together people with a lot of different backgrounds. So
yeah, that's a good point.
Great advice there. Now, Erin, can you tell our listeners where they can go if they want to learn more about you and your work?
Oh my gosh, so many ways. Okay, well, I tweet and I'm in the Twitter sphere. So if anyone wants to follow me, my handle is Erin W. Hodgson. So that's ERINWHODGSON. You can listen to my podcast that I have with Matt O'Neill at soybeanaphid.info, or you can subscribe to our podcast through iTunes or Stitcher. Anybody can send me an email anytime. And because of my extension appointment, I get a lot of emails, like from very basic, what is this bug, to can you give me an example program for soybean aphid in my area? So I do a lot of communication through email, and my address is ewh@iastate.edu. Of course, you can just, I don't want to say old school, but you can just Google me and you'll find I have a lab website, an extension website, and I have a lot of online presence just because of my extension commitment to presentations, publications, that kind of thing. It's easy to find me online.
Fantastic.
Good or bad, I guess you can find me pretty easily.
Yeah. Well, Erin, thank you so much for sharing those resources with us today. Listeners, definitely get in touch if you want to chat with Erin, if you have any questions for her. And Erin, thank you for joining us today and sharing a piece of your story on our show.
Thanks again for having me. I was very nervous to do this. I'm not sure why, because I have a podcast, but you make it seem so easy. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much as well. We'll see you next time on another episode of People Behind the Science. Your voyage to explore the lives of today's exceptional scientists has just begun. You can find everything we talked about today, including our guests' favorite books, biographies, photos, and more, when you visit us at www.peoplebehindthescience.com. I look forward to chatting with you next time on People Behind the Science.